book, Two Bits Amy. I'm here for my Friday reads, although it's technically Thursday night, and I think I may jump the gun a bit and just post this tonight. I have beside me a glass of wine, a bottle of wine, in fact, and I ordered this with my dinner off of Skip the Dishes. This is the first glass of wine I've had since the 14th of March. I finally ventured out yesterday because the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, had opened up some of the LCBOs for extended hours, and the weather was nice. I was in the mood for a glass of wine. I ventured out and I walked the 20 minutes down to the closest LCBO, only to find a line stretching outside around the corner, because of course they only let so many people in at once, and I wasn't willing to wait in line. Who knows how long it would have taken. Just the thought of getting into a line anywhere sort of freaks me out a bit. So I didn't do that. I came right back home, but today I still had the hankering for wine, so to speak. And so I went to Skip the Dishes, and $22 for this bottle, and I was quite pleased when it showed up and it was Merlot, because it just said it was their house red. And I had some pizza to go with it for dinner and cheesecake. The cheesecake was all right. The pizza was rather dry, so I actually didn't finish that, but the main reason I ordered was to get the wine. You didn't used to be able to get alcohol through food delivery services, but because of the pandemic, Ontario has opened it up, and so here I am with my first wine in over 2 months. And that is absolutely delicious. So on to the books here. I have been slowly working my way through this collection of short stories by Guy de Maupassant. The title story here is, of course, Butterball, which I actually ended up reading the other week in a different translation. I read it in this one where it still has the French title Boule de Souffle, and this one was translated by Roger Collett, whereas this one was translated by Andrew Brown. Although I think I preferred the Collett translation. I did read both, although it could just be because I read this one first before I read this one, and sometimes I realize I tend to like the translation that I read first. So I read that, and I read a couple more short stories in here the other week, but this week I thought I would pick back up with this volume and work my way towards finishing it. And I'm really starting to like Guy de Maupassant's style. He takes the most simple and mundane scene and gives it real interest, and often sort of a heavy last line. I quite enjoyed this one in here called First Snow, as well as the confession. The confession is about a woman who confesses that she is pregnant, and it's just this scene and this sort of sharp last line, where the other woman says, well, don't tell him that he's the father. Maybe we can still get 6 to 8 more months of free rides, because she slept with this guy who was driving this cart into town, and she ended up sort of sleeping with him after this long flirtation in which she was joking about getting a free fare into town, and eventually she went for it. And then First Snow is a fantastic one. This woman who marries and goes out into the country, into this very, very cold house. And it does remind me a bit of, sort of the Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary thing, where she's all excited to be married, and then she goes off to this isolated area and is bored to death. And she sort of latches on to this idea of it being so cold out there. And all her hopes and dreams are sort of translated to her husband through this idea of wanting a stove in the house. And eventually she is so exasperated that she literally goes out into the snow, not wearing proper clothes, catches horrible pneumonia, nearly dies, and gets sent to sort of this warm tropical place to recover and her husband, at the request of the doctor, finally installs the stove. But the story ends with this sharp line where she finds a letter from her husband. She opens it, still smiling, and reads, "My dear, I hope you are well and not missing our lovely part of the world too much. For a few days we've had a heavy frost, so the snow will soon be here. I love this weather, and you can bet I certainly won't light your wretched stove." And so I've quite been enjoying those Gustave Flaubert, Guy de Maupassant short stories. And then, of course, this week I did finish The Kingdom of Books by Orcutt. I went ahead and I read aloud through the entirety of this book in several videos. I noticed those have been getting not as many views as my usual videos would, so I get that that's not everybody's thing, but I really enjoyed it, so I'm going to continue on with similar readings like that. In fact, I'm going to be continuing on with this book collecting game by A. Edward Newton. I'll be reading the first chapter from this on Sunday, and Sean D. Standfast and I are actually sort of tag teaming a couple of books by A. Edward Newton. He is going to be reading The Amenities of Book Collecting, and he's going to be starting on Saturday and posting a chapter every other day, and on the days that he's not posting, I'll be posting a chapter of this book collecting game. Which is a fantastic read so far, and there's plenty of wonderful illustrations throughout here. Thomas Hardy, OM, for instance. And then I read this one the other night. This is Used and Rare Travels in the Book World by Lawrence and Nancy Goldstone. This is one that I've known about for several years. I recall, I think I actually borrowed it from my hometown library maybe 8 years ago and never got around to reading it, sent it back, and then of course it caught my eye as I was browsing the other day. Mine is a library discard, hence the relatively cheap price, and oddly enough too, when it was bound in this plastic, it's almost as though, there's some shine here, but it's almost as though the dust jacket wasn't folded correctly because the spine almost spills over to the front of the book. But I don't really see any way of fixing that without leaving white creases. But on to the contents of the book. So this was published in the 90s, I believe. Yeah, 1997. And it is about a couple from Manhattan who begin collecting books. And it's this very interesting story of their journey, and it's really from Nancy's perspective, or at least it's written that way, although it says they co-authored it. They had agreed, because their birthdays were so close together, they had agreed not to compete over presents one year, and so she thought it would be a lovely idea to get her husband a copy of War and Peace. Now, they had agreed to spend under $20, and so heading to, the local Barnes & Noble, she was unable to find a copy for that price in the store. Certainly there would have been copies, but that particular bookstore didn't happen to have a copy at the moment. And at least not one she liked. She was told that they could order in a paperback copy, but she was looking for something, more like a gift, something that looked like a gift. And so a friend of hers suggested she try a used copy, and she didn't really have a conception of the difference between a rare and sort of antique book and a typical used book, a ratty old paperback versus a nice hardcover copy that perhaps has some history to it. At least that's how she explains it here. And so she calls up this rare book dealer, and the guy is sort of snooty with her on the phone and says, "You're looking for a used book." And that's when she realizes, some people see that there's a difference. And so she finds this bookstore and she finds a copy of War and Peace, and the bookseller tells her all these interesting things about its publication history and about that particular copy. It's a particular classics edition that she has purchased a copy of. And so she takes it home to her husband, gives it to him, and they both read it and they both like it, and they both become interested in finding more secondhand books that might interest them. And so off they go back to this bookstore where she had purchased this copy of War and Peace, and they find some more classic novels that they have appreciated in the past, and some that they've never read before, some that are recommendations to them. And through this bookseller, they begin to learn a little bit about book history and book collecting. And it accelerates rapidly from there. They go from not being sure whether they want to spend $20 on a book to buying $650 volumes and first editions, and checking out library collections and going to auctions and rare book fairs. And it's just a delightful journey, although sometimes you have to cringe a bit. For instance, they walk into this one particular library thinking that they're going to be able to just be let in to see the book that's housed there that is bound in human skin. And of course, they're told that no, you need a letter of introduction from a academic or a professor, and you need to be doing research. Despite it being a public library, you cannot just waltz in and start handling the rare book collection. Although I really wish you could. Perhaps, though, that would be bad in the long run for those rare books. And so it's just this interesting story of discovery. And you have to remember, too, that this was published in 97. So this was the 1980s, early 90s that they are doing this. And there's really no internet yet. There is no online book selling. So they are looking in yellow pages. They are learning by word of mouth. They are looking at catalogs, and they are getting physical book catalogs sent to their homes. And sometimes discovering a new seller is a matter of finding them in the phone book and calling them up and asking, when can I come and see your books? I'd like to see what you have. I might want to purchase something. And then, of course, there's funny stories here, too, like this one particular bookstore I think it was on their trip to Boston. There was a bookstore in Boston where they went and they asked to see the rare books, which were locked in a separate room. And the woman there said, I can't, I have to run uptown. And of course they browsed a bit and realized that she was going nowhere. She just didn't want to show them. So they came back another time, and she said she was just out to lunch, and there she continued to sit on the phone on a personal call. And I think they tried, 3 or 4 times and never did get admission to this rare book room. And it's quite possible that the woman was taking one look at them and thinking these people couldn't possibly afford what we have in there, which seemed to be the sentiment of several sellers that they encountered, including one where they found this seller in a list in a magazine somewhere, or a catalog somewhere or something. And so they found the address. They go down sort of this dark elevator or whatever into this basement, and they find the shop. And the owner says to them, "How did you find us? We advertise very carefully, very selectively." And when they say, "No, we found you in the yellow pages," he hands them off over to his assistant. And they're seeing, these books worth thousands of dollars, and they're tempted for a minute by a complete set of Dickens, I think it was. And I do like the conclusion they come to at the end, though, that expensive, inexpensive, it doesn't matter. What only matters is that the books are special to you and that you created a collection that pleases you. There's no point in running after first editions or fine bindings if they're not something that you love, or if there's something that you can't afford. You can create just as beautiful a collection going after books that you're buying for $5 or $10 here and there. And so this was a great little read, something I would highly recommend. Definitely a lighter, more accessible read than some of these other books about book collecting I've been reading, and certainly something a lot more up to date. In fact, published 60 years, more than 60 years after the Kingdom of Books. So that's what I've been reading. I should mention this other one here too. This is actually from last week. I haven't picked it up this week, but I didn't do a Friday read last week. But I did begin reading Flaubert's Parrot by Barnes. And this is a curious little book. It is sort of an exploration of Flaubert and biographical material related to him, but it's a novel told through the eyes of someone who's very much interested in Flaubert. And the catalyst here is his discovery of two separate stuffed parrots at two separate stuffed museums, both museums claiming that their parrot is the one that Flaubert had on his desk as he wrote a certain short story that included a parrot. And it starts off, like a normal novel. I thought that's what it was going to be. And then we get a chapter on chronology, which is a chronology of Flaubert's life. And now we are into the Flaubert bestiary, which describes how Gustave was a bear, his sister Caroline was a rat, how he felt like a bear, how his life corresponded to him being like a bear, but then also how he might have been a sheep or a camel. And that's as far as I've gotten. It's definitely a peculiar book. I will likely pick it up again in the next few days. I did rather get distracted by some other things, but it's shaping up to be an interesting book, to say the least. So that is, as I said, what I've been reading, what I've read. I have plans to read once again this weekend, to enjoy this lovely bottle of wine. I think I will savor it over the course of a couple of days, since who knows when I'll find a line at the LCBO short enough to tempt me. And maybe I'll even get out and read in a park this weekend. Ottawa has opened up parts of its public green spaces and parks, and I've been told that it is now permitted to sit on benches again. So perhaps one early morning this weekend, I will take one of these books and I will go and sit on a park bench for an hour or so, and of course wash my hands as soon as I get back in the door. But yeah, it's beautiful summer weather here. It was 25 degrees yesterday, 25 degrees today, and I have to say I love it. Although I did close the window here to film this video because construction is ongoing on the lot across the way. And it's been interesting for all my Zoom meetings for work, all the construction noise. It's, either I swelter in the heat of this apartment, or I open the windows and endure the noise. And lately, the noise isn't too bad at all. I hope you're all doing well. Let me know what you're reading this weekend in the comment section below, and do let me know how you're doing these days.